Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to the Cabinet meeting in Living Wage Week. Could we make a start there? Do we have any apologies?
Apologies from Councillor Davis, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Any declarations of interest? Gail?
Thank you. Item 5, another interest because I'm a member of the Broads Authority that is mentioned several times within that report. And item 6 and an exempt appendix, I am a director of Norwich North Building Limited. It is a non-pecuniary interest, but if we get into detailed discussion, I might well have to leave.
Thank you for that. Any other declarations of interest? No. Public questions, petitions, I don't think we have any of those this evening, do we? No. Then we have accuracy of the minutes. Are there any amendments, additions? Gail?
Bear with me. Page 8, item 9 on Barnard's Yard. Wasn't actually accurate, so if it could be amended to something like, work will be undertaken to replace the temporary gas-powered plant room with a water source heat pump system, which is thought to be more efficient than ground or air source pumps, 80, and then it carries on. That's fine. It's just that first bit when wastewater was mentioned.
Thanks, Gail. Right. Now, before we start on item 5, there is below the line appendices on one of the risk register elements. Those, we have hard copies of those. If you haven't got one, if you want to put your hand up, we'll make sure you get one. Otherwise, it has been circulated electronically. Okay, let's go on to item 5, which is the East Norwich Master Plan. Mike, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Colleagues, this is a turning point in our progress towards an exciting new quarter of the city on brownfield land that has been regenerated. The East Norwich sites are the deal ground, the utility site and the Carrow Works site. And as the paper says, it's a once-in-a-generation regeneration opportunity for Norwich, with the potential to transform this part of the city and deliver wider benefits for Greater Norwich and the wider region. So the purpose of the report is to seek your approval for stage 1 of the East Norwich Master Plan, which has now been completed, and also for progressing to stage 2 of the process. And just to note that funding is already committed to enable the work to progress to the next stage, so there isn't a financial decision to be made around that. And you'll know, colleagues, that the City Council has been committed to maximising the regeneration potential of East Norwich for many years. You saw a Cabinet report in June 2020 which noted the opportunity that had arisen by the vacation of the Carrow Works site by Britvic Unilever to act as a catalyst for regeneration of the long-term vacant sites in East Norwich, and they do suffer from a range of constraints, but the availability of the Britvic Unilever site offered new opportunities to unlock and open up the sites. So at that time, in June 2020, we approved the terms of reference for the East Norwich Partnership, a new partnership, to steer the development of a master plan for the area and agree a draft brief as the basis for procurement of the master plan. And the reason we need a master plan is to support policy in the emerging Greater Norwich local plan. Well, that's part of the reason, should I say. There are other very good reasons as well. Now that draft, the East Norwich Strategic Regeneration Area allocates this area under a single strategic allocation for residential-led mixed-use development to include in the region of 4,000 new homes. That's up to. The master plan brief includes the provision of a supplementary planning document for East Norwich to support the policy. Now, Sustainable Development Panel has been involved all the way through, and I think it was earlier this week, might have been last week. Anyway, SD panel has considered this paper, and they have made recommendations. The first is that they consider that there should be further engagement with the Environment Agency in relation to flood risk in the context of climate change, using the indicative proposed layout set out in the master plan based on existing flood risk. And secondly, they welcome the provision of community infrastructure for schools, health facilities and public transport, but seek assurance that there will be further consideration at the development stage to ensure that this infrastructure is provided. So those are just a couple of comments that we've had from SD panel. As I said, the master plan work is in two stages. A key output of stage one, which is the subject of this report, is very high level, and I think it's important to make that clear. It's a high level master plan based on a preferred option, providing a clear understanding of the strategic infrastructure needs and other abnormal costs and the impact of this on the deliverability and viability of the scheme. Then at stage two, the next stage that we would progress to, the outputs would include an infrastructure delivery plan and a refined strategic viability assessment of the preferred option master plan, informing a refined version. As I said a moment ago, the East Norwich Partnership is a public-private sector partnership led by the City Council, which I chair. And the purpose is for partners to work together to develop the master plan, a master plan that's deliverable and will address the need for investment in substantial new social and economic infrastructure to unlock the development. The members are ourselves, Norwich City Council, Norfolk County Council, South Norfolk Council, the Broads Authority, Homes England, Network Rail, New Anglia Local Enterprise Partnership, and the landowners of the Deal Ground and May Gurney site, Carrow Works, and the Utilities site. Financially, there is a budget, and it's come from a range of sources, but it's important to note we've used town deals money, and we've also, all the landowners and those taking part have been asked to contribute to that pot. So they've got a real stake in the process, not just as the landowners, but they're actually putting seed called money in to support the work. And that level of partner support has been really important to drive the master plan. And I think it's probably quite unusual to have a public-private sector partnership like this driving such a development. We're all around the table because we want to be, and we recognise the benefits of being there, and recognise that we need to work together to make sure that the sites are unlocked and developed in a coherent way, including the infrastructure, which we need to work together to plan. So, we've had the first stage. There have been two stages of public consultation and public involvement and stakeholder involvement around that. The first stage was an extensive process of listening and learning. It had one-to-one meetings with stakeholders, including the partnership members, neighbouring landowners, as well as member briefings, community workshops, meetings with statutory consultees, and public drop-in sessions over 2 days. That intelligence that was gathered was then processed into a second set of proposals, more refined set of proposals, which were the subject of another public event over 2 days in October. So basically what we were saying to the public and the stakeholders and all the others were, this is what you said to us, this is how we responded. So we've been through that process. In terms of the concept master plan, the consultants have identified 3 primary strategic objectives for East Norwich, including, well, not including, these are the 3. Celebrating Norwich's waterfront, connecting the city and the Broads, and framing the future with the past. Now that's important because in particular on the Carrow Works side, there are many listed buildings, and there's also Carrow Abbey, and I know there's a lot of public concern that we develop that site in particular in a way which is sensitive to those buildings, and clearly that's one of the primary strategic objectives. Also, the master plan acknowledges the biggest challenges to be addressed are flooding, the complex underground infrastructure, particularly on the utilities site, the adjacent mainline, railway line and associated activities, and access to the sites, which is most constrained on the deal ground and utility sites, which is why Carrow Works becoming available has been very helpful in terms of that. There are a range of supporting strategies, a heritage strategy, a movement strategy, a public realm strategy, a land use strategy, a building height strategy, and also the master plan includes strategies for flood risk and mitigation, utilities, energy and ecology. So it's very, very thorough, and although high level at this point, those key issues are being identified as needing to be further work as the process proceeds. Some of the key elements, which I think the public and others will be really interested in from the master plan, are first of all creating new strong pedestrian and cycle connections, all modes vehicular connections through the sites, bus routes potentially through Carroll Works with the possibility of a bus route in future through the Deal Ground, new marinas, the creation of a web of green spaces and public spaces, landscape ecology and planting proposals, and a significant proportion of homes fronting open spaces and or the water, a land use strategy, and also social and community infrastructure, including a primary school and contributions towards secondary school place provision and appropriate community health facilities. So the question that often is asked when this type of development goes ahead is, what about the social infrastructure? Well, we're well aware of that in terms of building communities. The master plan that's been designed by Eliza Morrison will deliver just under 3,500 residential units with 33% policy compliant affordable housing and 732 square foot roughly of commercial floor space. But there are viability issues, and it's not uncommon for that to be the case, and while further refinement needs to be done, there are likely to be challenges in terms of the relationship between the timing of cost and revenue. As I say, not uncommon, but the master plan notes that a joined-up approach to funding across both the public and private sector can be considered and might well have to be in order to ensure viability. It's important also just to make it very clear again, this is a high-level document which will be worked up in greater detail in stage 2, particularly in relation to infrastructure provision, phasing, deliverability and viability. Stage 1 of the master plan was considered by members of the Greater Norwich Development Partnership on the 15th of November, that's yesterday or the day before, and basically they received it. There were no comments except that they wanted to be kept in touch as the process proceeds. So I just want to finish by saying this is a major piece of work. It's a very large area of land which is complex to bring forward because of the ownership and also site issues which we're well aware of. The only way that will happen is by all those involved working in partnership and producing a common master plan as the basis to go forward, and also as the basis of planning decisions in the future. And thus far we have got all those people together, kept them on board, had them put their hands in their pockets to help support the work financially. And I think that's something that the officers who've been working from this side can be really, really proud of, because I think it is a major achievement. So it's really exciting to be involved with. And as I say, I think it's a milestone. This is the agreement. We agree that stage 1 and proceeding to stage 2 today, it's a milestone in the creation of an exciting new sustainable regenerated quarter for the city.
Thank you very much, Mike, and I think to add our thanks to you for chairing this coalition and holding it together and moving the agenda forward. So much appreciated. I have been handed a note about a meeting of the Sustainable Development Panel that do recommend the draft Stage 1 Master Plan to Cabinet, but just noting some points about engagement with the Environment Agency in relation to flood risk issues in the context of climate change, which is an entirely good point to make. And then the second one about community infrastructure for schools, health facilities and public transport, but making sure that we are able to ensure that those come to fruition in a timely way as part of that. So that's been a helpful discussion at the panel. Any Cabinet colleagues wish to make any points? That was a very clear and thorough report, very positive. Sandra, do you have a question? And then James.
I do have a question. I'm asking on behalf because I'm a member of the Planning Committee, so I'm not getting involved in any discussions, but there's a question on behalf of other members. So it's picking up on what you just said, that the SDP wanted some more clarification from the Environment Agency, because as you've said, the report highlights that flooding is one of the biggest challenges, and the deal ground and utility site are in a flood risk zone rated medium to high risk, but that is a rating that predates some of the latest data and the latest IPCC report. So at the moment, we're looking at how to mitigate the flood risk for temperatures going up to 1.5 degrees. But can you explain to me where in the process we will be looking at what will happen if we go beyond 1.5 degrees towards, say, 2.4 degrees, and these different scenarios, how they will be considered in the master planning and other stages going forward?
That question was asked at the SD panel. We are in touch with the Environment Agency over those issues. I understand that we haven't had a response from them yet, but we clearly recognise that it's a valid point that was made, and that's how we came to the recommendation about further work with the Environment Agency. That's the answer to that. I don't know if you want to add to that, Graham.
Only to say that I think the debate at SD panel heard about that issue in some detail, and clearly in terms of taking forward their recommendations, what we're doing now through the, should Cabinet agree that this exercise should be able to proceed, is there'll be a variety of stakeholder meetings to take key partners and interested bodies through the process. One of those I would expect to be the Environment Agency, and so the technical issue that that is there is that their modelling, the Environment Agency's own modelling, has not been published and updated since the IPCC report came out. Clearly what we've seen over the years is that the modelling as it relates to flood risk down there has changed over the years. So for instance, the modelling that we're working with now about current flood risk is slightly different to where it was sort of 5 or 6 years ago when we considered the planning application in relation to the deal ground, and the modelling also built in the assumptions about what the impacts of climate change will have on the frequency of flood events and the nature of flood events, but clearly the understanding around the severity of climate change and its potential impacts are constantly being evolved effectively. So all we can do in terms of planning for the future of the area is have regard to effectively the latest available public data that is endorsed by the appropriate specialist agencies. But those conversations clearly are going on, but clearly it's very important to get it right as far as we can, although invariably what you are doing is managing a risk that you will have to live with. So as with much of the area, there will be no surety that you can ever give that there will never be a flood event, such as the nature of the risk that you are managing.
Thank you. James.
Thank you, Chair. This report and the master plan is to be hugely welcomed, and I'd like to offer my thanks to the officers for the work undertaken for this extremely complex redevelopment, which will see many parties working together. But I do have a few questions for Cabinet, especially given the risks attached with approving such a significant project. Firstly, as a council, how can we hold the developers' feet to the fire to guarantee the amount of affordable housing so that there isn't another Anglia Square scenario? How can we guarantee the talks about health facilities and primary schools on site actually happen? Obviously, that's the point that's been come up via SD panel. And secondly, the report uses words potentially possibility to talk about bus routes. Given that there should be an emphasis on car reduction, less parking spaces leaving more room for walking, cycling and play facilities, should there not be a strong commitment to public transport? With car-free development included and car clubs, there should be more demand for public transport. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Yeah, and some of those issues did come up at SD panel, and the answer is it's about the nature of what this document is. So what it is, it's a high-level set of objectives, a set of agreed objectives that we wish to achieve, and it is at a very early high-level stage. So in terms of things like guaranteeing that there will be a doctor's surgery there or a school, we couldn't do that through this document, and also around bus split routes. What we're doing is stating an aspiration, but we don't actually, as a partnership board, have the power to implement those things. So what we're saying is those things must be present, they must be part of the process, and then when the time comes further down the line, we would then expect through due process those things to happen. So the county council is a member of the partnership board, for example, and they're responsible for social care and education. So they're part of the process, they know what we're doing. But the partnership board isn't the place where they would give us a guarantee on that. That's not the nature of the process. So that's something that comes later on. What we're looking at the moment is, in principle, do we approve this as a development, as a high-level master plan, and are we happy, content to go forward to do some further detailed work on it? But I think, as I say, there's a point about what's in our power and what isn't, and that's an entirely different discussion in a different place, if that makes sense.
Chair, can I ask a follow-up?
You can.
I suppose, thank you very much to Councillor Stoner for that. I suppose my supplementary to that is, are those things a deal breaker for you? So if they don't come to fruition, is that the point that the City Council and as the Cabinet says we're going to walk away from this because we think that it's so important that there are health facilities and school facilities and good quality public transport that we don't want to see this progress?
I mean, I think we'll get to the point where there will be, so this will end up becoming a supplementary planning document. And so therefore, when planning applications come to, or informing that document, come to Planning Applications Committee, that would be what I understand my planning colleagues call a material consideration. So those are, Graham will correct me if I've got the terminology wrong. So basically, we will be saying that we want to see that infrastructure in place, and we might want to use Section 106 or sewer money or whatever to make sure that they come to fruition. But I mean, that would be no different to any other planning application where we could, based on planning committees' views, based on our local planning policy, we could set conditions saying that we're not prepared for this to proceed unless those conditions are met, and they could be around different forms of infrastructure, as they often are. So I think it's about the different stages of the planning process. But the man with the degree in town planning is probably going to refine that answer now, so I'll hand over to him.
What I would say is that because of the planned nature with the master plan supporting the policy in the Greater Norwich local plan, and then forming hopefully the basis for a more detailed supplementary planning document, that process gives us two particular advantages in minimising some of the risks that we may have seen in other effectively more speculative development when it goes into the planning process. Those two sort of key advantages is it informs part of effectively the development plan, which, as Councillor Stonard correctly refers to, will be a material consideration, but won't just be a material consideration, will be things that can actually be afforded significant amount of weight because they've got that status, because they're written into the planning process. So it gives the planning committee more power to require things to be delivered than they otherwise would have through the process. But then I think the other probably more powerful benefit that the process and completing the process has is it, because of the emphasis on viability and deliverability, it provides an evidence base to justify public sector investment in the whole development area. Because I think this is a classic case, whereas without some measure of public sector investment in it, you would be fighting a never-ending battle with the private landowners and the developers of it, arguing they couldn't afford to deliver everything that was needed, and so they had to compromise effectively, and that would push back on some of the debates that I think you've alluded to. The second stage of the master plan is going to focus on viability and deliverability, and it's putting that framework in place. I think the difficult choice for the public sector here is if it wants a genuinely sustainable development that delivers inclusive growth, so it's got employment alongside residential, it's got community facilities delivered at an early stage, it's got proper provision for multimodal transport rather than just what the market would deliver, and it's got the infrastructure up front early to serve it in the form of marinas, bridges, etc. It'll probably need some form of public investment in it, and it's that key investment that comes via agencies such as, most noticeably, Homes England. This master plan process will hopefully provide the best available evidence to justify what that investment needs to be and to set the framework whereby that investment will go in, deliver the infrastructure, but won't just release an increased land value for the owners. It will actually go in to intervene in the market in a structured way that enables that infrastructure to be provided in a way that effectively is in the long-term interest of the public sector, not the short-term interest of the private sector.
I mean, one could reasonably imagine that establishing a new community in Norwich of up to 4,000 homes and 6,000 jobs would have to have those key community assets and transport networks at their heart. So a useful set of questions actually from both of you, just to flesh that out. But I take it we're happy to move forward to the next stage of this programme. And could we put our hands up, Cabinet members only, please? Thank you very much. Okay, let's go on to page 23, which is the combined assurance report. There are three elements to this. The first element, which is the one I will deal with, is around performance indicators relating to delivery of the Council's corporate plan priorities. And then Councillor Kendrick will pick up the finance and risk elements in his comments once I've done that. So if I can ask you to turn to the appendices, and if you can turn to page 71, I want to go into a little bit of detail about the three strands across our directorates, starting with community services. And I think what I will do for the benefit of colleagues is when I've finished going through those, we'll take some questions on those, and then we'll move on to Councillor Kendrick's finance and risk elements. Okay. So the performance details in terms of the traffic light indicators, 6 green for amber, 1 red, 2 white, and monitoring data with no target set. I think very helpfully, as we had when we looked at this last time, is looking at the successes and the challenges. So the successes for this have been a number of successful bids for funding, in particular leading a Norfolk-wide bid to the now new Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, securing £250,000 of funding to help provide for people leaving prison to access accommodation in the private rented sector who would otherwise be rough sleeping. This, frankly, has been an obvious thing for decades, absolute decades. So we celebrate the arrival of common sense and common decency from central government funding, but it is a commendable outcome from the work that's been done by the team at the City Council with other partners. And of course the whole idea then is to graduate people into secure tenancies to help people re-establish their lives after prison. which is really very important. And related to that is some work with the Department of Ministry of Justice around the community accommodation service, again interim accommodation, but that pathway towards moving into secure tenancy. Challenges, as in life, internal review, which has been subject to much comment and discussion, and continued discussion tomorrow and next week, which is in relation to the health and safety and compliance issues in relation to the approach that we have taken with the self-referral to the regulator for social housing, and then identifying the areas that need to be made compliant, and working with our highest risk priorities as a way of tackling things in a logical, sequential order, and the resources that are going to be needed to deliver that. So that is a challenging piece of work. There's also some repairs and maintenance issues which need to be dealt with, and I think part of the narrative of how we deal with those issues is by the process that we've been going through over the last 2 or 3 years of bringing those services back under Norwich City Council control. The report on page 72 then goes on to look at some case studies in terms of really working across a number of vulnerable groups, ex-offenders, temporary accommodation, safe accommodation, dealing with domestic abuse issues, which of course have been escalated during the COVID period, and also work around disabled adaptations. And I note that significant money has been spent on delivering disabled adaptation improvements to residents' homes. That's outlined. And then some very good work on the digital inclusion. That's part of our work on the Good Economy Commission to provide an emergency data bank for people so that they can get that emergency mobile data, usually within 24 hours, so they can stay connected. Just a vital tool of everyday life. So, you know, it's nice to be able to see some specific examples, how they're being implemented, who they're targeted at, and that's a very pleasing set of initiatives as case studies. If we now turn to page 84 of the agenda, that covers corporate and commercial services, 4 KPIs, 1 red, 1 amber, 2 green. The red indicator is around processing housing benefits, but there has been a marked improvement, so that is down as a success. Clearly more to do, but some momentum behind that, so that's very pleasing. Updated risk management strategy and policy approved by Cabinet on October last month, and the finance and audit teams contributing to the first combined quarterly assurance report to Cabinet in September. So bringing back, I think we talked about this earlier in the autumn, bringing together financial risk and performance data. So challenges, there are some recruitment issues in finance for a number of roles in the light of retirement and some turnover. So there's work being done excuse me, with HR to progress the recruitment and promotion roles, and the finance team is working alongside service leads on strategy to identify and assess budget options for 22, 23 and beyond. Very important piece of work, and that's to be commended. Challenging though for the finance team in carrying out that work, but absolutely essential. I thank them for that. And I'm delighted with the, and I know Councillor Karen Davies, if she was able to be here today, would want to pick this up, which is the case study around the non-commercial debt policy, to enable different parts of the council to work together on people's financial circumstances, those vulnerable to debt, working across services to find solutions, building in a debt respite scheme, making sure that people get the support that they need in a timely way. So that means that people are able to continue, at least in part, to maintain some contributions, and that maintains collection rates while supporting people. So early intervention tools are really very important in this regard and have been developed. And also in relation to council tax, looking at people's personal circumstances, making sure that, and this is a piece of pilot work, making sure that we don't need to send enforcement agents in because that racks up an additional fee charged to the debtor, and that compounds the problem, and to work to ensure that people are able to stabilise their financial position in that relationship. And so some new work being done by debt enforcement agencies. So I think those are excellent initiatives and will make a considerable difference to our residents, but also in terms of the resources that we might necessarily need to put in place should people fall into serious debt. So we come to the last of these, which is on page 91, which is the development and city services. So we've got some successes and challenges here. We've got 10 corporate KPIs, 6 are being reported, 1 red, 3 amber, 2 green. And going forward, we're looking at the success of the publication of the housing output indicator and looking at that in relation to needs across Greater Norwich and as part of the joint core strategy, so joining some of those different elements up. So housing delivery did fall sharply to the year ending 2021. Some of that, of course, is related to some of the COVID issues of that period, but there is a pipeline of housing which is in place to move things forward. So, despite those challenges, and the fall in house building rates is obviously not good news for Norwich, but it's drawn in with a number of supply-related issues and disruptions of that character. But it does mean we need to redouble our efforts to deliver against key regeneration priorities, such as Anglia Square, which is out for public consultation, bring forward East Norwich, and obviously our own house building programme to achieve some stimulation of the housing market, help with employment. But as a fast-growing city, we need those additional houses to be built across all tenures of housing. We are a strategic housing provider. And we have a case study which is enabling opportunities in the city. So looking to work with people to support people to remain safe and healthy during COVID. COVID has not gone away. Some people may think it has, but it hasn't. And we need to calibrate our response to COVID, monitoring local figures as well as understanding that people need the means by which they can, if they need to isolate. We've got additional funding. Let's remember that the sick pay rates in this country are the worst in Europe, and we're able to top those up and provide additional support for people. and also work around keeping the city clean. So we're working with a range of partners. One of the great successes, and there's Councillor Gail Harris and Councillor Viv Thomas on the site of the former King's Arms pub in Mile Cross, the success of a compulsory purchase order, and then the work that's being done through the Townsdeal funding. I mean, that is really powering along, and it was great to be at the opening of the City College Digitech factory in September. Great opportunity for top quality training and great jobs to flow from that and to feed into our digital sector. And we've heard that the progress of the East Norwich Master Plan is continuing, and Anglia Square remains a top priority, absolutely vital to get that blighted, derelict site away. And we know that from the significant amount of consultation, particularly community consultation, people are feeling ownership of the future of that site and want to see their aspirations realised. So those are the salient points, I think, from those three directorates. I'm happy to take any questions or comments from portfolio holders first, and then move on to Sandra and James before we go on to Councillor Kendrick's report. No comments from colleagues? Oh, yes, Gail, please.
Sorry, I was trying to find the page again, but I can't. I was just going to highlight what you've already talked about, some of the wonderful work the Disabled Adaptations team is doing. They are a very small team, but they are absolutely dedicated to what they're doing, and they've made some real progress. And of course, it is a tenure neutral service as well, so I think we should give them praise.
Let's make sure we minute that. I'll start with James actually first.
Thank you. The only point I wanted to make was picking up on the digital inclusion. It may seem like a really small thing, provision of a SIM card with some data on it, but having seen firsthand just how difficult some families found accessing online provision of school during the early stages of the pandemic, that access to data is so pivotal. So I'd just like to sort of basically say I think it's a really good thing that via the work of the Good Economy Commission that piece of work has been undertaken. I guess I was slightly intrigued to presumably some members of the public had more than one SIM card, and I wonder whether there's a process of giving them more data rather than issuing them with another SIM card. But that was a minor point, but a good initiative. Thank you.
And just a reminder how vital this is to everyday living and transactions. Now it's if you don't have it, it's basically a democratic deficit. Thank you for that, Sandra.
I just wanted to ask around the challenge which is highlighted in the report around the re-let times, because we've talked about this, I believe, in Cabinet when this previously came, and there was some reassurance of that it's being dealt with. However, it's now further slipped as far as I can read from the figures. Could you just explain why that is and how we're aiming to get on top of it again?
Okay, thank you, Sandra. Ruth, are you in a position to answer, or Lou, perhaps? Better person to pick that up.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, we are seeing some significant challenges in particularly void turnaround times. We are working with the contractor at the moment to try and achieve some agreement as to how we might package up that particular area of work and engage some subcontractors to support us in reducing those times. Those conversations are underway, and we're hoping to conclude those as soon as possible.
And Gail?
It is of concern. There's no two ways about it, because there are people out there who need homes or need to move because of overcrowding or various circumstances. And also, while the properties are empty, we're losing rent as well. So we are working really hard on it, but there are many challenges around some of the contracts, shall we say.
Thanks, Gail. Okay, if there are no more questions or comments, I'll move on to Councillor Kendrick's contribution.
Thank you, Chair. The report shows the forecast financial outturn for the financial year 21-22 as of the 30th of September. I can deal with first the General Fund. The forecast revenue outturn for the General Fund at Q2 shows a £278,000 underspend. The underspend is largely due to the reduced corporate financing costs, which includes a lower forecast borrowing cost of about £591,000. Reduction in the forecast contribution to the capital programme, which is about £300,000, and additional forecast income from the government sales fees and charges compensation scheme of about £200,000. However, these underspends are partially offset due to the pressures being identified across a number of service areas. These are arising because of the challenges around the delivery of the 21-22 budget savings, housing benefit subsidy, recovery levels, and COVID-19 continues to impact income levels. Further details on the variance are shown in the appendices. It's recommended that the Cabinet agree to the principle of setting the borrowing cost underspend of £591,000 aside into an earmarked reserve to support the budget position in the following financial year of 22-23. This action would result in the current £278,000 underspend being adjusted to a forecast pressure of £313,000 going forwards. This will therefore require action to address the forecast pressures over the remaining 2 quarters of this financial year. Areas for review are set out in paragraph 8. The housing revenue account I shall deal with next. Forecast revenue outturn for the housing revenue account at Q2 shows a £535,000 overspend. Cost pressures of £1.3 million have been forecast to address issues identified through an internal review of health, safety and compliance in our council homes. This is partially offset by a forecast underspend on the HRA repairs programme of about £750,000. Further details on the variations are shown in figure 1.6. During Q2, several service pressures have been identified and Cabinet approval is sought for the environment to reallocate expenditure budget underspends to meet these additional costs, as explained in Annex 3. Finally, capital. The forecast capital outturn for the General Fund at Q2 shows a £7.816 million underspend. Forecast underspends relate mainly to the revised implementation of timelines for the number of Towns Funds projects. Cabinet is asked to approve the reprofiling of £7.18 million of this financial year's General Fund capital budget into future years to reflect the current forecast project timelines. The forecast capital the forecast capital outturn for the housing revenue account at Q2 shows a £12.81 million underspend. The forecast includes predicted underspends on the upgrade programmes in relation to windows, structures, heating and whole house improvements. There have also been changes to the profiling of spend on new build schemes at 3 Score, Marcross and Argyle Street. Cabinet is asked to approve the reprofiling of £3.057 million of this year's financial HRA capital budget into future years to reflect the current forecast project timelines. I therefore recommend this to the Cabinet.
Okay, thank you very much. Any points from Cabinet members? Questions? Sandra?
Yeah, I do have a combined questions with regards to estate management and improvements, which you may know is a big concern of mine, because I do think that if you walk around some of the estates, especially in the city centre, they can do with any money for improvement and improved management they can get. So I was just wondering whether you could explain to me why £210,000, I think, are considered budget not to be needed for the estate management improvement, and I'm aware that we've signed a new contract, but I see that there is again over £270,000 underspend in the estate aesthetics programme, which is really worrying. So I don't understand. I thought we had a contractor delivering it for this year, so could you just explain where that underspend comes from again?
Shall I start? Can you tell me? I know it's in here. The underspend, the 200 and something.
It's the estate aesthetics programme. It's got a 207.
No,
the 210,000 one is the estate management improvement. So it's in one of the tables which shows.
We'll find out in a moment. I know it's in there. The estate aesthetics, the programme is being worked through. We did appoint a new contractor to move things on. To be perfectly honest, we have a new officer who's dealing with some of the issues, and work is being done, but it can only be progressed at a certain speed. That is improving. The estate management improvements, I think I found it. That was for when it was to do with NRL and 3 School, and that was money we put into a budget when we were converting some of the housing that had been built for private sale into housing for our social housing. So because there were some amendments, some things that just had to be done for our standards. So that's what it is. So that's not the same thing as what you're thinking about.
No, I think that's covered the point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gail. Right. James, any questions on this? Okay, so we have several recommendations which we will find on page 23. Thank you very much, Alex. So are we happy to support the recommendations? Please indicate. Thank you very much. Okay, now let's move on to scrutiny recommendations. Paul will introduce it. James, you may have a comment or two you want to make before I respond.
Yes, as normal, I shall obviously hand over to the Chair of Scrutiny to introduce the recommendations from the Scrutiny Committee.
Thank you, Councillor Kendrick. Thank you, Chair. So the report before you today actually covers 3 scrutiny meetings, but one topic, and that was wood burning and the sort of effects of wood burning on the environment and on the public. We took evidence from a emeritus professor in the UEA who talked about the science around pollution and the movement of pollution. We had a report from evidence submitted from the campaign group Mums for Lungs in our first meeting. And then the second meeting we heard from the Industry Association with responsibility for, they sell wood burners, and so they were very much looking at it from a pro-wood burning perspective. And then a member of the public also gave their lived experience and some of the impacts around pollution. So what that ultimately led to, as you will see on page 110, paragraph 3 of your report, is you've got 7 recommendations for Cabinet to consider, which some of which are around communications that can be done to bring members of the public so they fully understand some of the impacts of having burning wood in their homes and having bonfires, and others of the recommendations around writing to the chair of the APPG and MPs, etc. So I'll leave it there, but happy to take any further questions if you have any, Chair.
Okay, so I'd like to thank Scrutiny Committee for the work that they've done on this. I know you've had 2 scrutiny meetings to go through this, and you did take evidence, valuable evidence, I think. So that informs our broader strategy on air quality, and of course, Councillor Stonnard has been leading on this in terms of our asks as part of our Transport for Norwich planning. Air quality, ambitious air quality targets are are part of that package. And I think what this does is it helps to inform and round out some of those issues. What I'm going to suggest is that these recommendations, I mean, some can be acted on pretty quickly, providing valuable information to go to the APPG, for example. That can be done expeditiously. Other issues, as we're working on air quality matters, will come forward as we're working through this agenda, and in some cases when resources are lined up as part of that. I think that's the way I'd like to proceed with this, because I think we're happy to accept, obviously, the evidence-based recommendations, inform some of our policy thinkings, bring things forward at the appropriate time, and deal with some of the immediate, easy to tick off issues more or less straight away. If you're happy with that? Okay. Anything to add at all, Mike, on that?
Yeah, I just think it's really welcome. As you'll know, we've worked hard for many years to improve air quality in the city, and in our response to the Transport for Norwich consultation, we've made some very big asks of the County Council in terms of measures, particularly around traffic management, to reduce and remove emissions from the city, and those discussions are still ongoing, but we're pushing them very hard on that. So this is very much in keeping with that work.
Okay, thank you very much. So we're happy, and we note the other points of changing people and the scheduling of housekeeping work programme stuff. So we're happy, obviously, to note that work. So let's move on then to item 8, which is non-recoverable national non-domestic rates.
Would I be able to ask a quick question?
Oh, I do apologise.
That's all right. That's all right.
Yes. Okay. Sorry, Sandra.
That's okay. Well, my question is with regards to the first recommendation of the wood burns item, and obviously it's hugely appreciated that was discussed, and the idea of a comm strategy is great. But I don't know how the rationale for this got fleshed out, but it suggests that the current vision for this communication strategy will not really be appropriate to address the problem. So if you start with the first sentence, it says the committee heard evidence that the effects of wood burners can be harmful, and it's not that they can be harmful, they are harmful unless you don't light it at all. And then the rest of the rationale section suggests that the comms will again be normalising the use of wood burning and implying that sort of ready-to-burn wood is safe. And just because it's considerably less polluting than using wet wood or in open fire doesn't mean that it's safe. It's still hundreds of times more polluting than, for example, gas fire, central heating or heat pumps. So in my opinion, the comms strategy should discourage wood burning completely if Norwich really wants to take air pollution seriously. So if you take, for example, the Mums for Lungs leaflets that I think you've talked about as well in Scrutiny, that has a section, if you absolutely must burn wood, this is how you can do it safely. And I think that should be, that should be the maximum of sort of the normalising we should do in a communication strategy. So I was just wondering whether you can clarify and confirm that the intention for the communication strategy is really to discourage wood burning completely.
Any comment on that, Graham?
I'll certainly try. I would suggest this is a work in progress. As you may have seen, there was a relatively small article in Citizen magazine that's just been published that was a start of something, and I think I need to sit down and spend some time working with communications officers about what the best way to take that forward is. I think the purpose of whatever we end up doing in terms of comms has to be to maximise the benefit in terms of air quality that we've got through reducing people's burning of wood and how they burn wood, because that's the purpose of doing the exercise. It's to improve air quality. I'd need to frankly take a bit of advice about what's the best way to actually achieve that, because we don't have regulatory powers that can tell us ban, stop, do not burn it. And so whether we'd be better off taking a very hard line response in terms of any comms that we do, I would want to question and be sure that that was the way of delivering the best outcome in terms of air quality. Because if we're keeping an eye on a sort of comms approach, it ought to be about encouraging and working with people, and we don't want a strategy that effectively people turn off to because it is seen as hectoring, particularly when we don't have the powers to necessarily enforce it. So as we haven't worked it through, I don't quite know what the theme, the tone that we will be taking is. What I do know is the overarching objective of doing it is to actually find a way of nudging people into making behaviours that mean that we're maximising the benefit to air quality.
And that would be a broader point about, mitigants across a number of different activities that people undertake. The other point I would make is if we were talking about asking people to, as soon as we had the power, which we don't, to remove that form of heating, that may be possible for some people who are got sufficient resources. For other people, that would be a financial impossibility. We have to factor in the circumstances that people have. So, it's a thoughtful report. It's given us food for thought. It's relevant to what we're doing around air quality issues, and we will, take this away and action and think through the implications as we go forward. Okay. So now we can go on to, sorry to have missed your question, Sandra. So we can now go on to write-offs of non-domestic rate bills or accumulated debt.
Thank you very much, Chair. As I always say on these occasions, we only write off debt as a last resort. And of course, it doesn't prevent us from actually, if it was at all possible in the future, actually claiming these monies. But obviously, as a company, the phrase used to use in the company that I used to work for, you can't get blood out of a stone. And there are occasions where if a company goes into liquidation or administration, you simply cannot get the resources back, you can't get this money back again. We've got two examples here. One was, as the states called, the Britannia Enterprises, and we're going to write that off because they've gone into liquidation, and there's unlikely to be any distribution to the unsecured creditors, and this would amount to about £73,000. Second is with regard to Peacock Stores Limited, which went into administration. As the report states, unsecured creditors such as ourselves will only really be entitled to, not entitled, but will probably only get between 1 to 2% of any debt repaid. Obviously, if that is received, then the debt can be written back up onto the books again and taken into account. So I would urge this Cabinet to agree the recommendations.
Thanks very much, Paul. Cabinet members, we're happy with that. Sandra, James, any questions on that? Okay, can we agree the recommendations on page 115, please? Thank you. Right, let's now go on to item 9, page 119. This is the contract award for a Comlin-led blue bin recycling contract, which I pronounced that correctly. But that's in the name of Kate, Councillor Kate Oliver.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we're considering approval for the extension of the existing contract with Norfolk Environment Waste Services, NEWS, through the existing joint venture arrangements for the recycling of commingled mixed recycled blue bin material, to you and I, until 2027, and to agree to change in the charging mechanism for these services from a fixed fee to a variable gate fee, as outlined in the report, which I'll explain. This is a contract delivered in partnership with the rest of Norfolk's local authorities, so it's managed through a joint venture between Norfolk's 7 district, borough and city councils and the county council. Contract with North Environmental Waste Services. Expires in September 2024, but we have an option to extend till 2027. Now, the 7 other councils within the joint venture are also in the process of obtaining approval to amend and extend the contract, as we are. It's clear that this partnership approach will deliver best value for all the councils involved in terms of economies of scale and improved governance. These benefits would not be available to individual councils if they decided to re-procure these services individually. So 3 of the councils have already agreed to this, and possibly one other one that was going through the process yesterday. So it's strategically important to the council. It helps us deliver our aims around carbon reduction, climate change, and specifically reducing waste and increasing recycling. It allows us to deliver a class-leading range of recycling services comparable with anywhere else in the country. Also meets the objectives of the city vision and the adoption of the environmental strategy in 2020. Proposals contained in the report are the result of 18 months of work between the local authorities and NEWS, and it's aimed at making sure that our recycling arrangements are financially and environmentally sustainable in the medium term, which is the next 6 years, and that risk is shared more equitably between councils and NEWS, aimed at maximising value from our resources and innovation in how we procure and manage our contracts. And at that point, I want to say thank you to the officers for their excellent work in this. And the proposals will significantly influence the council's waste, recycling and street cleaning services over the next 10 years. Services and contracts need to be redesigned to deliver current and future environmental and financial sustainability. Proposals will also provide stability for us during a period of significant change in national waste policy and legislation. For example, key piece of legislation, the Environment Act, which will receive royal assent this autumn, includes proposals for a deposit return scheme for drinks containers, extended producer responsibility for packaging, whereby producers and retailers will pay for efficient and effective collection and processing of most forms of packaging, and also consistency in collection services, i.e. councils will be required to provide household collection services for a wider range of materials, including glass, paper, cardboard, cans, plastics, food waste and garden waste. But I have to say that Norwich is also already doing pretty well in this regard, thankfully. So it will continue to allow Norfolk councils to manage their material locally, importantly adhering to the proximity principle outlined in the UK's waste management legislation, whilst having peace of mind that our material continues to be managed responsibly in terms of where it ends up. So currently the contract is based on a fixed price gate fee, when the council pays a set fee for every tonne delivered to the NEWS material recycling facility at Coddy. And because of fluctuations in the commodity market, we're proposing that we amend the existing terms of the contract to introduce a variable gate fee linked to the value of the commodities that we recycle in our blue bins, cans, plastic, paper, etc., and extend from now until 2027, so that's 6 further years in total. So the recommendations are to approve the extension of the existing contract, and for the Executive Director of Development and City Services to have delegated authority to approve variations to the contract to ensure improved control and oversight for all partners, and that's incorporated into the contract as part of the allowed extension. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate. Very clear report. Mike?
Just want to speak in support of this as a former director of News, I think then Kevin and now Kate, so I think I'm 2 behind you. But I think it's really important. It does provide an excellent service. There's a risk share amongst the different local authorities in the county who are involved. And I think the issue about the fixed gate fee, we've seen quite marked fluctuations in commodity prices over recent years, and the fixed gate fee effectively hamstrung the company. The company wasn't able to come to us. Well, actually, didn't need to come to us for exceptional support when the income that it was receiving wasn't commensurate with the costs of disposal and recycling. So I think the variable gate fee is really, really important in terms of the sustainability of the company and the arrangement we have, which is mutually beneficial. So I'd just like to speak in favour of that.
No, very, very helpful, Mike. Thank you very much. Any other comments from Cabinet colleagues on this? Seems to be a logical way forward. Any questions, James?
Yeah, thank you very much. Having visited News a few years ago and it's a hard hat visit to see the recycled material making its way around. One of the things that I was sort of told while I was there are some challenges with the commingling, particularly with glass getting in and sort of corrupting the other materials, and therefore that affects the amount of money that can be got when this stuff is put out to market. So I wonder if there's any scope moving forward to look at collecting glass separately again to help the company maximise its return there. And my second point is, Councillor Oliver, you referred to the Environment Act that's getting more assent this autumn, and the deposit return scheme. Holyrood has announced today that they've, in the Scottish Government, are delaying their deposit return scheme again by more than a year, because they seem to have some challenges with that. So do we think that sort of thing will be, when royal assent happens, how quickly do we think such a scheme could be seen in Norwich? Thank you.
Thank you. Who wants to start? Kate, Andy, do you want to make an initial comment, Kate?
I'm going to refer to Andy, thank you, and I've discussed with
Andy?
Yeah, in terms of the glass recycling at the moment, it's not affecting the price that news are getting for the commodities that get through. The materials recovery facility there, and yeah, I'll leave it at that just now. So it's not a factor at the moment in terms of the end markets. However, that might change with the legislation that's coming in. With Councillor Oliver mentioned the extended producer responsibility and effective and efficient collection and processing, and that might change. That might drive a change to separate collections. But at the moment, there's no plans to change our collection, and you know, that's part of the success, if you like, is that they're easy to use, and we don't have multiple containers for the materials that we collect. But as I say, the caveat is that might change when the extended producer responsibility scheme comes in. In terms of the deposit return scheme, I have got some experience in that, and in terms of my previous role. And when will that arrive in Norwich? It's really difficult to say. The way that the legislation, the primary legislation has been framed, it's very open-ended in that. My guess will be that the UK government might want to see what happens in Scotland first and use that as a test bed before they introduce it down here. So I would say it's probably 2-3 years minimum before we have a deposit return scheme, and that is a minimum, I would say, if that answers your question. Yeah.
Sandra?
I've got a question along similar lines, but also to say I come from a country where we've had a deposit return scheme for decades. I think it's not that hard.
Can I say, when I was a boy, it was the norm here. Yeah. Absolutely was the norm here, and I don't know why it ever stopped, but we used to go round after school, round all the litter bins, finding all the bottles which had been discarded so we can take them to the newsagent and get the money to buy sweets.
I remember Corona bottles.
Oh, yeah.
So my question is around the cleanliness of recycling to Andy, which is probably along a similar line, because that used to be a problem in the past. Is that something that has been progressed further? Do we get cleaner recycling?
I would say it depends, if I'm honest with you. So there are some areas, just in terms of general performance, and it has to be said, more affluent areas will have a less contamination and a better quality of material going to the material recovering facility, and unfortunately in more deprived areas that's not the case, and the variation between contamination can be 5% say in our better areas, up to 40% in the worst performing areas. It is a challenge, but it's one that the material recovery facility can meet at the moment. We don't have an issue. What I need to make clear is there's not an issue with material going to the end market, whether that's in the UK or overseas. We don't have issues with rejection, but that's because of the work that gets done in the materials recovery facility, if that's where you're coming from. Yeah.
Okay, we can't take the recommendations yet because we need to go below the line, and that actually concludes the above the line business. So can we agree to exclude the public? You're watching, and there are thousands on YouTube. Okay, that's passed. Right. Okay, welcome back. Briefly. Can we agree the above the line recommendations on page 119? Thank you. Can we vote once again to exempt the public by going below the line? Thank you. We'll just wait a moment until that